At the age of 12, Bradley Cohen could find his way through a society that condemns people with Tourette syndrome as outcasts. Brad's hometown was Missouri, where he spent his childhood with his mother, Ellen, and little brother, Jeff. In the class, his peers used to laugh at the funny noises that he, uncontrollably, used to make, cuffing or dog barking noises. Everybody, including his dad, used to tell him that he needed to stop being notorious, and nobody would believe him when he used to say that he simply couldn't stop his tics. Sudden head and limbs jerking, eye blinking, and annoying twitching. He was just a little boy who loved playing with his little brother, who used to call him Dr. Bobo. Sometimes, he would go on long solo bicycle rides. He was an intelligent boy who noticed that he was capable of living with his disability within a society that only accepts the full package. The Tourette syndrome symptoms surfaced in Brad's life when he was 6. He grew up living with what he used to call his constant companion. His disability was just a companion that had no power to stand in his way of piercing through life's ordeals and many setbacks. At school, they called him a freak and bullied him at times while boys cheered for his opponents. They laughed at the noises and tics that were part of his disability, and his grumpy teacher didn't bother to look after his special needs. Instead, she showed him that he was an unwanted extra number amongst her students. Even the principal couldn't take it. He thought that Brad was disturbing the other kids in class. But Ellen believed that her son wasn't acting up. He was suffering from something nobody could understand. She insisted that all of them, the adults, were following the wrong track. And because of that, he didn't have many friends. Only closest friends, his little brother and his mom. Those who used to call him names out of affection and love. Those who knew that he was an 80s songs lover and baseball enthusiast. He loved the freedom on the playground of baseball, where he noticed that everyone was either blinking their eyes or jerking their necks, and even yelling or perhaps barking as he could hear. But his father, Norman Cohen, wasn't on that list. He couldn't fathom the kind of symptoms, and had the idea that Brad was only pretending to clone dogs and all those sudden tics that made him get upset. Sometimes even yelled at the little kid. He thought that all he had to do was focus and self-control. Brad's parents got divorced, and the little brothers weren't as much of a help for their mother's business. Despite that, Ellen might lose customers and bothered not a little to strike the unwanted mouths off her shoulders once they talked ill against her firstborn boy. Years passed by, and our hero lived a normal life within a disabling society. A young man with ambitions and dreams, he became a cum laude BA graduate from the university. He drove his red Volvo all the way to Atlanta. The police officer who registered him exceeding the speed limit looked at his handsome features, but when Brad's constant companion said, "Hello, I'm here," he stared at his face, and Brad had to explain about his disability. He reached the Atlanta Regional Board of Education and met the recruiter. She was reviewing his outstanding resume. He emphasized talking about the elephant in the room that disrupted her focus. Brad believed that his teaching skills weren't disabled by his tics. He believed that he should have the chance like any other fully packaged citizen. And knowing that the Americans with Disabilities Act prohibits discrimination against disabled people, she wouldn't reject him. But Brad needed her to believe that he was capable of giving back to his country like any other good citizen. In the end, he could convince her to get him into interviews with some schools' principals. Brad remembered the time when he started the shrink sessions. The journey went to waste, especially since the doctor diagnosed him with a denial state after his parents' divorce and wrongfully prescribed God knows what kind of medications. Nonetheless, Ellen's efforts went persistent on the missing piece of the jigsaw. She went through a medical bibliography that got her closer to her son's disability symptoms. And there it is, the Tourette syndrome. She found it and told her son about it, then headed to the shrink and told him. And that was the day when Brad could know the name of his constant companion. It was a team battle. Brad, Ellen's, Jeff's, his dad, the shrink, and the whole society. A battle in which they learned how and when they should leave the fear aside and start living with acceptance and love. But would that help Brad to move on with his newly discovered diagnosis? That could be tough from our perspective. And unbelievably, tunnel-focused vision. But for Brad, it was just another barrier to overcome. His mother once took him to the church to join a support group of all those who have the same disability. Brad couldn't believe that society looked at him the way he looked at those people who accepted being marginalized, or call it discrimination. He took into his core belief that he would never allow his disability or the society to draw his fate in life. Let's see how he got through the teaching interviews that came in succession. The first principal didn't know why the young aspirant was suddenly coughing or perhaps sneezing with a weird neck jerking. Brad had to introduce his constant companion. Probably the result wasn't promising. The second one, he decided to give a brief talk about Tourette syndrome, then strengthen his image with his educational achievements. Seemingly, it didn't work in his favor. The third time, Brad's strategy was to put his tics talk all aside and walk the principal through his resume and his distinctive achievements in the class. Now he made up his mind to wait for the call. One of Brad's closest friends was Ron, who most of the time used to remind him about his empty dating life. But today, Brad got to go out with this blondie. And in the bar where everyone seemed annoyed with the noises he made, Brad took it easy on himself. He jokingly thought that his date was too cool for his tics. He got a call from his dad, and the next day, he visited him at his work to have lunch together and catch up with what was going on in their lives. But that went wrong when, clearly, his father showed doubt in his son's ability to stand on his feet and pursue his passion in life, teaching. Nothing would change for Brad. The same father, the dubious minds about his capabilities and pathetic eyes that thought he was lesser than, once again, that full package. Even with changing friends in schools, the result would be the same. He was an outcast in their narrowed vision. But could that change even for a bit? For once. He once was summoned by the principal, Mr. Meyer, who knew that the little boy had a disability. He told Brad about a concert in the school, and despite his reluctance to attend, Brad was asked by the principal to be there. At the concert, he was sitting with all the noises he was making. The attendees wanted to leave at the end when the wise principal called the boy on stage. In a touching brief question and answer exchange of words between the principal and Brad, the school stood for him applauding. The principal asked him what they could do for him. Brad said he wanted to be treated like the others. We specifically need that principal everywhere in our lives. There was this urge inside the boy that he must prove to society that they were wrong about labeling him as disabled. But adult life is tougher. Brad went to an interview where the principal thought that a handicapped teacher would be laughed at by his fifth-grade difficult students. He could accept him once he refrained from making those noises. But how could that be possible? Brad took his portfolio and got in his car with tears in his eyes. It was unbearably painful how someone could call him a handicap once he had a firm belief that he was perfect and nothing was wrong with him. Thinking of what he needed at that time. That's true. He needed the Ellen leverage right now. He called her and vented the heavy burden off his chest. Only when he heard her saying, "You will, Bo, you will." Immediately, his mindset shifted to the road map of Atlanta to search for the right school for him. He marked every school that he didn't go to, reorganized his portfolio, and headed out with his head high. He put an X mark where he was done with the school, and an O around the school where he still needed to go to. He relentlessly wanted the job. Meanwhile, as he needed money, he worked at his dad's construction area. It was a part-time job until one of the principals would call him for an interview. Brad's optimistic resources were about to dry up, but every time, it seemed as if God was sending messages of hope his way. His stepmother, Diane, once visited him and whispered words of hope that it wasn't that Tourette would take him away from teaching. Rather, it was because of it, he was a distinguished teacher. That day, he was waiting for a phone call. Finally, it rang. The next morning at 10 o'clock, he went to the Mountain Elementary School. The interior was uplifting, and the principal and his assistant were welcoming. He talked about the impact his teachers had on his life, and how he only trusted that one principal, Mr. Meyer, and his Tourette that elicited the best out of him in the big picture. They liked his spirits, and above all, his great ability as a teacher. Brad nailed it at the 26th interview, where he was relaxed for the first time. He sat in a circle meeting with the second-grade teachers, who couldn't believe he would teach kids discipline when his constant companion was coming out all the time. Brad reassured them that once he educates the students about his illness, they would accept him. Perhaps he got a disappointing vibe, but he felt as if he had blown his last chance. He left his part-time job with his dad, and his tics became intense. All were indicators that our hero wasn't relaxed. He exercised patience, which wasn't his great trait, to wait for that phone to ring once again. Instead, he heard the doorbell and found an unexpected visit from his little brother, Jeff. It wasn't what he expected, but it was what he needed to cut off the ropes of worry. They went to a golf course where the admin asked him to leave. He left with his brother, who gave him a distraction from what worried him the most at that time: the phone call. At last, he got the long-awaited call from the school. Once he went there, the principal told him that they just needed a living example like himself that would teach the kids that nothing is impossible in this life. Finally, Brad got the job. Brad opened his eyes to new worlds of owning his own classroom after a battle-like pursuit. He got the roster ready on his desk, and all the staff came in to help in equipping the class for its teacher. Brad got a 1-year contract, which meant that he must show the school how great a teacher he was. Plus, he wanted to study for a master's degree. All that lined up in his plans. But what different this time was that he eventually started thinking about his love life. He subscribed to a dating website, and there it is. He met Nancy, a gorgeous brunette, who shared his taste in old music, especially Milli Vanilli in the 80s. But having what he used to call a second date syndrome, he couldn't ask her out again. Brad wasn't expecting to get into a relationship. Then, out of the blue, Nancy sent him a message on the website, insinuating a second date. He wanted to indulge his senses while chatting with her. He played their favorite, Milli Vanilli's "Baby Don't Forget My Number." Enthusiasm got into him for his class. He had put that welcoming paper on his class door: "Welcome to Mr. Cohen's class." He decorated it with what grabbed the attention of the second grade's little angels: their pictures, the encouraging words on the wall, Waffle the bunny in the cage, and much more for exploration in his little world. The day came. Kids were coming in with their desks and chairs, and some even called him weirdo. But wait until Mr. Cohen proved that it was okay to be different. The first lesson started with writing all letters in the capital form on the chalkboard. Tourette syndrome. The littles' curiosity kicked in, and their questions started pouring in. He answered and got himself closer to them. They liked Brad. Except for Thomas. You gotta find at least one bully case in your class, and Thomas was that one kid, even though he had a whole bunch of problems. ADD, ADHD, OCD, and that he could leave him for the special ed. Brad accepted the challenge of having Thomas in his class. After all, he knew what it looked like to be the black sheep in the white crowd. But what he couldn't think was that one of the parents would withdraw his daughter, Amanda, from his class, as the father said she wouldn't be able to concentrate in his class. On the same day, Brad got to know that Heather, one of his students, was undergoing chemotherapy. About his love life, it was going well with Nancy. Those bicycle rides, shared laughs in the greenery around them, chasing the ducks on the decks, and sharing future plans. But once he told her about his master's degree plan, she got confused whether he was up to leaving her. But he said that he would take the entrance test locally under special accommodation. Brad got to innovate ways to teach his students lessons like in geography, teach them discipline, like how he did with Thomas, who got himself into Mr. Cohen's detention, which was simply telling him how privileged he was to be able to read. But once Tourette got in the way, then he had to push extra hard through his will to read. Thanksgiving came, and Brad was on the way to St. Louis, his mom's home, to celebrate the festivities with his family, and taking his girlfriend, Nancy, for the first time for his family's visit. Brad confessed his fears of losing his girlfriend once she's fed up with his noise, of hurting her, but above all, of getting hurt by losing her. His mom encouraged him that the only thing he should fear was letting Tourette take the girl away from him, especially since she had that spark, or that certain je ne sais quoi. But with his dad, it was always a hard road to navigate. His father admitted that it wasn't getting well when they were around people. He thought perhaps it was his fault that he couldn't fix his son's Tourette, or perhaps he passed it down to him. Brad had never felt easy talking about his constant companion whenever he was around his dad. Once the holidays were over, Heather's health deteriorated, and she stopped attending school. The dreadful news came when everyone knew that the child had died. Life's wheels went on, and Norman Cohen's attempts to come closer to Brad became constant, and giving him the love that he didn't know how to show to his son who was disabled in his books. Once he built bookshelves for the school library, a gesture that melted down the iced wall that was towering over the father-son relationship. Brad introduced him to his students, saying, "Hey class, that's my dad." Hillary, the principal assistant, summoned Brad for an announcement in front of his classroom that after the assessment by an observer, Brad had been chosen as Sally Mae's first-year Teacher of the Year in the state of Georgia. Everyone applauded this milestone in Brad's career. Later on, he gave a touching speech in front of the gathering, thanking his family, school staff, his students, his friends, and above all, his Tourette. He carried out his plans and pursued his dreams to the end, earning the master's degree, becoming Homer, Atlanta's Braves mascot, as he dreamed all of his life, and marrying his love, Nancy. Last but not least, continuing on teaching. The movie is inspirational and thought-provoking, and is based on the book Front of the Class, How Tourette Syndrome Made Me the Teacher I Never Had by Brad Cohen and Lisa Wysocki. It scales both sides, the difficulty that the affected person with Tourette syndrome suffers through the society. The other side, which is society itself that needs proper education and knowledge about the illness, and how it affects the people around the person with the disability. Both sides need help and a scientific approach, but most importantly, understanding and acceptance. The movie is a biographical drama that was released in 2008. It's directed by Peter Werner. It stars James Wolk as Brad Cohen, Patricia Heaton as Ellen Cohen, Treat Williams as Norman Cohen, and Sarah Drew as Nancy Lazarus. Dear viewer, please share your opinion in the comments section with #CinemaRecap.